more of a like, okay, I'll give him solidarity, and then I'll also gives me something to. I assumed I'd have more time than that. Well,
All
I
right,
guess I do have
guys.
lots of time.
Sound check, sound check.
Sound cheek, sound cheek.
How's it going, everyone?
Oh yeah, sorry, echo. That's my fault. Hang on. All right, sound check again. Sound check again.
Sound check, sound check.
Again.
No echo?
Yeah.
Wow, you're banging so hard on your desk, Darren. You gotta go easy on those buttons.
So the echo should be gone. Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. Welcome to CanHammer podcast episode 200.
Made it. Made it.
Now that's 200 by modern numbering. It probably goes much further than 200, but I don't know when. Maybe we'll find out tonight when the numbering got reset or.
So it never really got reset. It's more that there's been like other kind of branches of shows and other things, and so like we used to have like main shows and we used to have other shows that were kind of like side pieces. So
Okay.
yeah, it's plausible it's in the 220, 230 released content range, but yeah, we can cover that a little bit later. So
Okay, so it's a bit weird, but Chris is here. Chris has taken a bit of time off from the podcast recently. It seems like it's been months and months, but actually we think it's maybe been about 4 weeks.
yeah, like most people didn't even notice I left, so that's fine. That's not true, but it's okay.
Yeah, because like you were still hard and heavy when you guys did those marathon Space Marine episodes, and yeah, so that wasn't that long ago. And we have Francois here again tonight, and Nick is sleeping.
Oh, poor baby. Snook on.
The baby's got the best of him.
Oh, it catches up on you, man. It catches up on you.
Yeah.
Can't blame him.
So tonight we're going to celebrate our 200th episode here with Chris, who we're going to talk a little bit about the history of CanHammer, which is super interesting and a long and winding road. And I know some of it, but not all of it. I think we did a similar cast like a number of years ago, maybe when we first merged in OnePlus, something like that. I think we've done this before, but it was a while ago. And,
I'm assuming most of the listeners right now haven't been around that long, so don't really necessarily know the roots, because like we've changed so many different directions over the past. Actually, not that many directions, but we've changed a few directions.
I wasn't around last time you did that. If only for my edification, please. Take it away.
And it's not online either, because every so often I do like a purge of the backlog, and there's a lot of theories on whether or not you should do a purge of your backlog or not. But generally, I think it's probably for the betterment. If it's kind of irrelevant to the current listener, you don't necessarily want people that found you to go all the way back and listen to things that were like previous editions and maybe times that were maybe not as consistent or as quality or different changes. So I definitely did. I did that fairly recently. I believe I got rid of most of the shows prior to like the end of 8th.
No, you didn't. Because on my app, I can still go back to 2014.
Yeah, but you must have downloaded them then.
No, I just subscribed.
Well, then that's crack. I went and I removed a lot of that. But,
Well, I haven't tried to download them, but they're available on. Well, they says it's available on this app, but that's interesting because, like, especially how fast the game is moving these days, stuff becomes irrelevant very quickly. I mean, I only just hit 50 Tacticas, and I didn't start those very long time ago, and already the first 20 I did already, like wrong edition. It's like, yeah.
And like YouTube's really good at kind of sorting that algorithm a little bit better than I think podcasts, because it's consecutive. And so like I've made that mistake too, and that's the reason I come from that angle is you go back and you listen to a show, and sometimes you'll be like, oh, I'm going to go right back to the beginning, and then you're like, ooh, I should not be doing this, and then you go back to the current kind of. And it's nothing against them, it's just that podcasting as a medium in general has changed. And what you expect from a podcast today is not the same as maybe what was like groundbreaking and amazing 10 years ago, right? So
speaking of new groundbreaking things, have you guys heard of this app called Clubhouse?
Never heard of it, no.
Nope.
So I was just informed about this, and basically it's basically podcasting, but without recording. And so you start a room and people just come and they just talk. So it's almost like Zoom without the video, but it's not recorded or anything. And it's invite only at the moment. So like all these like celebrities and stuff are on it, and a lot of scientists, and it's very tech focused for some reason. Like Elon Musk was on there. That's kind of how it got a bit famous. And it's pretty interesting. So I'm like looking at this platform as a it's kind of like as if we were podcasting right now live, but other people could just talk with us. I know they can kind of talk on Twitch and like by typing, but like people could actually talk.
It depends what you want to get out of it. I think if you have a fan base already, that sounds pretty great. If you think about us, for example, our live viewership is so low compared to our pre-recorded viewership that it would be almost like it'd be a lot of work for a small area type thing. But no, it sounds cool. I'm not really sure what'll catch on or whatnot. You know, it seems like podcasting is still kind of a very powerful force in the kind of the way it is right now, but
yeah,
it might evolve and change. I know that like there's other apps like we do actually technically push our podcast out to like other apps and stuff. Like I can't even remember the names of them, but we do them all. So
yeah. Okay, well, we're going to talk about that more in a minute. First, since Chris is here, I thought it would be cool, and people are always interested in what Team Canada is up to in terms of Team Canada for the WTC, not any other sport, and with the WTC still on as of right. What's Team Canada been up to, Chris?
Yeah, so I'll start off with there's a lot of kind of questions around this. We get them quite regularly. The current ETC plan, or the WTC plan, is that they will be changing. They will be deciding on the venue and putting maybe like some financial backing into the event around the Easter weekend. So essentially, right now, you're waiting for Easter before you'll actually know what's going to happen. So it's like, okay, that's fine. But what we've been doing as a team is we've been actually very, very, very busy. And I think I alluded to this a lot earlier. We started, maybe about 2 years ago is when the real hammer dropped on the team, and we started being more of a serious entity, and maybe trying to take some of the systems that we've learned and kind of take the lessons that we've learned and kind of apply them to our systems. And we want to produce a way in which we do things, and a system and a process that is kind of beyond the people on the team and is more of just a way of doing business, for lack of a better term, to kind of give the team a way to improve and measure that over the future. How we started that is we've been basically doing a lot of meetings lately. Like we've been doing a weekly meeting since about September to kind of get the team together, build that relationship, build that bond. We didn't really start heavy until January. In January, we started mandating TTS games. And so I know a lot of people are scared of that word mandate, but when you live in Canada, you can't really practice WTC games. Like, I know that Francois and I played on TTS, and, he didn't like it, and that's fine. But, the fact that the pandemic, we actually used it as a way to kind of force our players, and myself included, into this TTS platform. And then we could challenge other teams like Scotland and Poland and a few other teams. So as of right now, we've actually just finished an exhibition match against Team Scotland. And so we took kind of what we've learned. We've created a pairing system. And this was our first time this edition and this year applying our pairing system to another WTC team, which is kind of interesting. And we didn't really know what to expect. Our initial list design was a lot of experimental lists and a lot of holes and kind of what lists we wanted to use for what purposes. And so, we weren't necessarily 100% there on our list. And a lot of our players had been relatively untested at that point in this edition at that level. So, yeah, we challenged Scotland, or actually, I can't remember if they challenged us or we challenged them. I think I challenged them. And then we did our pairings. They actually concluded after pairings that they were going to win the round by a 98. And so for those that don't know, the WTC, it's 2 teams of 8. You play each other. It's a 20-0 system. So you take the differential in your game, and every 5 points you get 1 point towards a differential. So if Francois and I play a game of 40K and he wins by 15 points, it's actually 16 points, then it would actually be a 13-7 going for the differential. And so they had predicted they're going to win by 98, which is quite a bit. That means that they're looking at something like 12 points in every as an average across all their games. And our pairings matched us as an 87 to kind of beat them. So you need an 86 to win, and our conservative estimates were like, we're just barely going to win this, but we're going to win this. And then so we lined up and played, and we had a lot of really good games. I got actually the pleasure of playing Innes, who's the captain of Team Scotland, and he was playing his Necrons. And so we matched up. I actually went into that game. I had predicted that I would get 5 points and lose the game. And I ended up achieving a 1 and losing the game, so which is kind of unfortunate. But the way that Necrons work with the triple Satan, which is what he ran, kind of trumps the Sisters, right? So Sisters are really designed as hard-hitting, trading. You know, I have these decently pointed units that can go in, wipe you off the board, trade really well. And yeah, I can't deal with 3 Satan. And it's also did a couple of really awesome things. Like he zoned out really, really, really well and basically stopped my scramblers. I don't know why I took scramblers. I took it in a few of my test games, but I think scramblers is overhyped at the moment because so many people succeed at it. But then when you get into a game like this against, a really high-end player, they're not going to let you scramble. And it's actually not that hard to stop it against most armies, unless you're really winning already, and then you can pull it off because you're kicking the crap out of the person. So that was it. At the end of the round, long story short, we got a 90, which we're really happy with. We did several layers of predictions, and we were basically dead on, or pretty close to dead on. Plus or minus 3 points is very, very good. So we won the round as we predicted. Most of our games actually went pretty close to as predicted. We did overperform in a few matchups, but that is what it is.
So just remind people who's on the team. Is it the same people from last year because you guys didn't go in the summer, basically, or are you?
Yeah, so we took the opportunity of the pandemic and the fact that all the tournaments were shut down to decide that, hey, we're going to keep the team that was already selected for the previous year. We'll use the pandemic time to kind of get ahead, figure things out, use that extra, like you're almost given a break, right? Like it's like if you're a sports team and you're playing, it's like almost like a bye weekend or a bye year or something or a bye week, because now we're able to practice and keep things going, and we don't have to lose our momentum by, selecting a new team and going through all these things that slow you down long term. And I know that kind of sucks for some people, but it was a brand new edition.
Yeah.
And when it's a brand new edition and there's no tournaments, how the hell are we selecting a new team, right?
Yeah. You already got a new edition to deal with. Yeah.
Especially if people can't travel and things like that. So we moved in that direction. So Jim Vessel's our Chaos player. We have Skari as our Dark Eldar player. We got Devin Swan is on there. He's currently playing Necron, so it's Devin likes the best armies in the game, and that's what he's playing. We got Eric Marco, who plays a mix of things, AdMech and Knights and stuff like that. Jason Sparks on our Marines. We got Tim on the Harleys. We got Dustin on the Tyranids. And then we got myself on the Sisters. Mm-hmm. And in addition to that, we have a non-playing coach, which is Cody, the owner of the Hooded Goblin.
All right, nice.
And then we actually did something brand new this year, and we added 3 non-playing practice teammates. And so we selected three players that generally do really well, very good players, and that we wanted to kind of stress test our team with, get fresh eyes on it. And a lot of the other teams do that. They'll also give us the ability that if we have basically 3 people that know our system and are already involved in our process, if something was to happen to a main player. And with COVID, right, like the odds of going with the full team is kind of low, because you never know. Somebody gets COVID close enough to the event, they're out, right? Or you never know. So we thought that would be a great addition, and it's worked out so well that we're moving forward. And so those 3 players are Dominic Carrette, so from Ottawa, Isaac Bates, who's I believe he's living in Trenton these days, and then Alex McDougall from Vancouver, or he's from BC. I don't think he lives in Vancouver.
All right, Alex, nice one. Nice.
Yeah. So it also it kind of gives some depth to the team, adds more layers. And if you're serious about it, like serious teams have spares. They have additional people looking over the matchups.
It's a really good idea, and those guys would definitely test you. Which is kind of what you want.
Yeah, so Isaac came in a little while ago, and then he's been helping us test a lot. And then Dominic and Alex came in recently. And so they haven't had the full experience yet because we had our Scotland exhibition game, which keeps everybody very busy. And we've actually also signed up for a tournament. It's a Greek Hammer tournament, and it's basically a WTC practice event. Now, there's a lot of anybody could have brought in an 8-player team, but there's a few other countries like England's playing in it, Germany, the Greeks are playing in it, and several other countries. So we also entered that tournament as kind of a way to, just kind of play different people, test lists. It's going on for something like 6 weeks, and then you're allowed to change your lists every 2 rounds. So we'll have 3 basically iterations of lists to test, which is really cool.
All right.
And so our round 1, just we got this team called COVID-21, which is so everybody could beat COVID. And we're going to be playing. We've already played 2 of our games against them. Eric lost 13-7.
COVID's winning.
And Devin won 20-0. So we're actually still winning.
Okay.
Get some vaccines in there quick.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that's really cool to get an update on Team Canada. Here's hoping that WTC actually happens. Say the odds.
And we can legally go. The event might happen, and then certain countries may not be allowed based on COVID protocols.
I was reading an article today that said that the Canadian government expects fully vaccinated, at least 14 million people by June, which, if it does happen, is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, their current
our government overestimates a lot.
Yeah, their current rate of vaccination doesn't really give me much
you know
confidence.
what? I'll push back on that. I'm pretty sure what they've been doing all along is to underpromise and overdeliver, and I'm optimistic myself.
Well, they haven't over-delivered yet, so we'll see.
Yeah, I'm not I guess the big moral of the story is, well, that's the other thing. When I took a break from the podcast, I did get a lot of messages are you still on the WTC team? I guess people thought that I just disappeared. I don't know, but anyway, we're operating on the assumption that the event is happening and that we are all going and that nothing bad's going to happen. And that's just, I think, the way that you have to live your life right now. And I'm okay with that. And
yeah.
I can adjust things as they come. It's not really a big deal.
Okay, so to finish, Chris, where can people follow Team Canada WTC?
Yeah, just WTC Team Canada on Facebook. We have a page. We have Twitter and Instagram. They're not very active right now because Facebook is better. Scary essentially runs the Facebook page. So you'll see lots of posts of who we're playing and how we score, and you can get some insight into that. I believe Scary and Dustin have been streaming some of our games recently. So that's Stutter Scrub or Scurdcast. We haven't streamed any through our channel yet, but that's just because I'm lazy. So,
yeah, we could pretty easily just screen capture on Discord. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for that update, Chris. That's exciting. I hope it happens. And you guys certainly seems like you're spending a lot of effort preparing for it, which is pretty cool.
5 to 6 hours a week minimum. Yeah, it's a real commitment now. It's that should be stressed. If you want to be on the team, be prepared. It's you have to show up to meetings. You don't. We want people that are committed.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So now we're going to go to the main topic, which is history of CanHammer. So I looked up when I joined. That was August 11th, 2016. It was an episode with you and Logan. I was at Logan's apartment at the time, and we were talking about new players and how to choose your army in 40K. And that was the first time I was on the podcast. Shortly before that was my first ever game playing against. I played against Logan, and I deep struck Drago and my Grey Knights into a building, and they all died.
Was that Logan or was that me? I think I was there for that.
I think you were there, but it was at Logan's apartment.
Okay.
When he still lived in that apartment building near Riverside.
Or Nick's house. No, it was Nick's house, maybe.
No, it wasn't Nick's house. Because Nick's house, I played there a few times after that. With the Screamer star that you could not kill and stuff like that. But the Deep Strike mishap was my intro to 40K. That was exciting.
Yeah, it's good that stuff is out of the game because I think that does kind of some of that random for people that maybe have only played the last couple of editions. You used to have a lot more random elements to the game where you would roll a scatter die and 2d6 and your unit would just like go crazy, and if it touched something you had to roll and see what happened to them depending on the edition.
Yeah, like die. Okay, so when does it all start, Chris?
Well, so there's a kind of a long reason to how all this stuff kind of started materializing. The cast didn't actually start until 2010, but everything for me, I guess, started materializing in 2007, which is when I finished my degree, and then I started getting back into the hobby, as most people do. And so we were playing pretty hardcore. So I used to play at the store in Brampton called Action Hobbies with, I think you guys know Ricky, but you might not know some of the other guys like Cal, and there's a couple Chris's and Juan and a few other people.
And this was fantasy at the time, right?
Oh, we played both, believe it or not. I've always played both. But so we used to play fantasy. This is back in 2007 before the podcast was a thing. So we played we used to play 2-3 times a week, and I remember I used to go to 2 tournaments a month because I lived in the GTA, so it was really easy. And they had Hall of Heroes, and so it was this huge thing, right? Playing all the time, and I would say it was like a significant portion of my life for roughly 3 years. And then I got a pretty big promotion, and I had to move basically across the province to a place that there isn't a lot of gaming, and that's kind of where the podcast idea started. Is I was essentially alone in Eastern Ontario, where I live. It's basically where I live now. And this was before a lot of the major scenes in the area kind of folded. Like the Ottawa scene was very small. They had a store, Games Workshop store that they played at up in Bayshore, and that was about it.
Yeah.
So I moved out this way, and podcasting was relatively new at the time. There was one Canadian 40K podcast at the time that I knew of, and I don't think there was any more when we started. It was called the Drop Podcast. They only went for like a year or something, and only a couple episodes. And it was kind of interesting, but I listened to like a lot of like 40K radio when that stuff started. And I was actually one of the original 40K. They weren't patrons back then, but it was like the group for 40K radio, like one of the original. They had like a list on their website. It was like really small. I was one of the originals up there, or fairly early. I'm not sure when. And then so I started like wanting to do a podcast. I'm a tech by trade. I'm into computers, and I like audio and music, and I used to play percussion, drums, in multiple different styles, and a few other instruments I used to play. You could tell I have all this musical instruments behind me. Just kidding, I have nothing. I haven't touched an instrument in years, but so I started getting into kind of that, and I wanted a way to essentially, because I was going to so many Canadian tournaments, I wanted a kind of a way to talk about people that we knew and our scenes and things like that, and maybe do something different or better or worse than some of the other ones. And so actually me and a buddy who lives really close, he still lives around here. I ran into him at our kids play soccer together last year before COVID. So I ran into him in a field. It's Colin. I don't know if anybody would remember that's listening now. So we started the show in 2010, and our first episode was Warhammer Fantasy related. Even though we both played more than just fantasy, but we kind of focused on that at the time. That was the big tournament game. Fantasy tournaments was kind of they used to call them like the adult tournaments, and the 40K was kind of the kids tournaments. That didn't go over very well, but there was a time when fantasy was like the serious game, right? But maybe back in like fourth edition 40K and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we started the show quite easily back then, just recording in my basement with I still have it. It's like a little portable microphone. We recorded several shows. Our first real show was like a Warriors of Chaos when the new book came out for 8th edition review. And that was like kind of our big kind of break, was that show. Because I guess like I was a power gamer. And so I had all the Warriors of Chaos combos figured out.
You a power gamer? No.
What do you mean was?
I still am, but anyway, back then, power gaming was way more than it is today. Like the combos that you took could be gross. So actually, your buddy Phil,
yeah,
I ran into him at a fantasy tournament right around this time in Ottawa. And I
Whoa.
did like a power gaming thing to him where I like -3 to his leadership and ran off his ogre gut star and like won the game in like one turn, right? So
I'm gonna ask Phil about that horrible memory.
yeah, that was me. I think he knows. Maybe he doesn't know it was me, like because that was a long time ago. But and that was actually a time when I was actually getting. No, I still wasn't in great shape then. But anyway, so we started with kind of the 8th edition fantasy, and it kind of caught momentum. A lot of it was on the back of just the fact that we played so many tournaments, and the way that the meta worked back then is that there was no souping in fantasy ever back then, and you know AOS has a lot less. So what a book had that was good was essentially good for a long time, right? So you could do like a book review, and that as long as you knew your shit, that book review was very accurate for many, many, many years, right? So we had a pretty decent following back then of people that just kind of fall down. We had a lot of antics, right? I think a lot of people know I'm a little bit like when I drink a little bit, I get a little bit wild, right? So it was a pretty wild podcast. Lots of F bombs, lots of making fun of each other. We used to rag really hard on each other. We used to do some crazy stuff and drink really hard at tournaments, which was, you know, maybe not the best thing, but it used to be a thing. And so we continued on, and then the second kind of co-host, we brought on this guy named Dan, who also lives in the area here. I don't think he plays anymore. And it's weird because I live in a small town, so actually his wife got a job at the same building that I work at like 2 years ago, which is kind of weird. But and then so yeah, we kept moving on with that, and the three of us, and then I think it was like a year into it. John Green kind of joined the crew, even though he lived near Toronto. We ran into him at Du Bois GT one year, and we just started like hanging out with him. He listened to the show, and we started drinking, and then he kind of has been an in and out guest for quite a few years. Not recently, but quite a few years prior to that was him. And then yeah, eventually we kept moving, and Colin kind of got out of the game, so he left, and then Dan got out of the game, left. They went back to World of Warcraft, and I think they just got a little bit tired of like the traveling that we had to do for tournaments.
Yeah.
As they got older, and then that's when Ron and I partnered up.
Ron McCallum.
Yeah, and then we ran kind of a remote Skype. That's when we started using Skype as a medium, and we kind of ran a remote Skype fantasy podcast for quite some time. And we were both power gamers with 5 or 6 armies each, so we had a lot of expertise. We were able to review the books, talk about combos, and we were doing 2 or 3 tournaments. And like this was back when I was actually winning tournaments as well, so there was like a lot of more excitement and hype around it. And you know, today I'm kind of a dad, so it's got a lot harder to.
So this is before kids, right? Just to clarify.
Oh, all this is before kids. Yeah. And then like you get married, and I still kept playing, but we always kind of threw in the odd 40K episode here and there, and kind of did my own thing. And then eventually, kind of fantasy died. Ron and I tried the AOS thing. Didn't really work. It was, I was kind of done with it after the first Capital City Bloodbath where AOS came out. And then so Logan was kind of around because he was a big hardcore fantasy player, but we started pivoting more towards 40K around that time.
So Logan at the time was like him and Nick and Andrew. Was like the main 3. They were 1+ armor back then. Kind of doing like a separate thing, but then obviously because we're all Eastern Ontario, kind of you guys ran into each other, I guess, at some point, or you met him way before that.
Quite regularly. I think they were listeners, and like, yeah, we'd be at all the same events in fantasy. And actually, Andrew and I, when we got the idea for Capital City Bloodbath, it started with Andrew running a fantasy tournament, 8th edition Warhammer, at the hotel that he works at, which is the hotel that we stay at for Capital City Bloodbath.
Yeah.
So he ran like a little like RTT in the back corner, and Jason and I were there playing in it. And like I didn't even know Jason Sparks till that tournament, and so we kind of got together, and I think somebody somehow introduced me to Jason and was like, "This guy has tables and wants to run events," and I was like, "Okay, I don't know who you like, you know what I mean? Like, cool." Like, and then I was like, I want to run events, and then like Andrew did the same, and that's kind of how Capital City and the whole like thing kind of started, and then we did fantasy for 1 year, and then AOS came out, and we pivoted to 40K. And even though Logan was on 1+ armor, he was also a co-host of CanHammer. Like they were separate at that time, and he just kind of did because he was really into his town. He was really into actually frontline gaming. He's the one that introduced me into the ITC and that kind of environment because I'm not really into that kind of internet 40K culture. Like you don't see me very active in a lot of that stuff. But he kind of brought that to the show. Stats. We started getting into like stats and rankings and factions and frontline ITC, that kind of stuff. And
because at the time, like OnePlus was mostly YouTube videos, and you were podcast because you didn't have a channel or anything back then, right? You were just podcasting.
Correct.
And so then it was like a mix. Like they would do like YouTube stuff, OnePlus Armor, but they didn't join you for podcasting, basically.
It was just Logan, yeah. And so we would just kind of do our own thing. And like that's in CanHammer was only ever meant to be a podcast when I started it. I had no desire to do YouTube. It was just not something that, like, I think people can kind of tell to this day. It's not something that I prioritize or that I really enjoy being. I don't really enjoy being on a camera for some reason. I just don't. Like, I don't know what it is. It's just the way it is. But yeah, so Logan came on and we actually ran it for quite some time, and then you actually joined us as essentially a third wheel.
Yep. It just glommed on like a bad parasite.
Yeah, and then Logan basically quit, and once he quit, we were kind of like, okay, what do we do again? And then it was just kind of you and me for a while there, but not really. It was kind of like me doing my own thing when Logan quit, and then you kind of took over OnePlus Armor.
We merged it.
Before
Logan
stopped. Started. But he was done with the 40K podcast, I believe. But like it was kind of like I think Nick was about to leave and go into the army, and so Nick kind of is the one that catalyzed the merge. If I'm being honest, I think it was actually Nick's brainchild.
So I kind of met you guys and got back into 40K in 2016, and then that was my first podcast was in 2016. So it was a bit before that. And then I started to make videos because like I'm that kind of guy, I guess. And then I showed Nick, like I filmed like one of our games or something, and I showed him like the edited battle report, and he was like, "Oh, well, why don't you like upload this stuff for OnePlus Armor?" And then so I started uploading for OnePlus Armor initially, and then it was somewhere around the end of 7th, because I remember because Logan was still playing at the CanHammer team that year. And then it was shortly after that the Triptide days that he kind of stepped out a bit. And then I think it was in and around before the next CanHammer team that Nick brought up the idea of merging OnePlus, because OnePlus there wasn't really much going on. And Andrew had started doing like Batman and stuff like that, right? And then we all just decided to merge together into CanHammer, and then the channel got ported over basically to the new CanHammer YouTube channel, which was mostly me producing video content, but then the podcast continued as was. And Logan stayed on for a bit, and then like eventually like he dropped, right?
Yeah, he dropped completely, and like it wasn't like, like I should go back. Like maybe there was some times when people left and there was a little bit of maybe not drama is the right word, but maybe there's a little bit of hard feelings here or there. But like, yeah, when Logan left, he kind of stayed on the crew. He just didn't really want to play anymore.
And he actually
stayed like friends
still
with
been
us,
like helping run tournaments. Yeah, like he's still involved in CCBB, even though he had never played. Yeah. So,
but I understand that point of view, right? Like you don't enjoy the direction that the hobby's moving, but you still want to be a part of the community and the friends. So, like, I understand that. But yeah, and then so he split, and then I think you and I started going pretty solid a couple years ago, and then we've never really stopped. I don't think.
Yeah.
It's kind of gone like it used to be more like mixed guests. I think it was me and like a different person, and then that kind of got tiresome to switch. Always find a guest, and you don't know what their mic quality's like, and blah blah blah. But yeah, and then you and I have been going for quite some time. So
yeah, the first time I was on, you gave me a hard time about my mic quality, which, to be honest, was terrible.
Well, it's not that I always like to like when somebody comes on, I'm always like, wear a headset. plug it in, plug in your laptop, and let's keep this going,
Well,
right?
I mean, that's perfectly fair.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting podcast kind of theories. I know we're getting off topic here a bit, but there's a lot of podcast theories about, like, I've heard a lot of people say, like, oh, these Skype podcasts don't work. You know, there's no kind of banter and dynamic, and you have to do them in person. And I kind of agree to that, but I think it's like, without the fact that we've used Skype and leveraged a lot of these tools, and we've been leveraging Skype now since something like 2012 for podcasts. So that was like before Skype was heavily mainstream used for kind of shows at that time. And yeah, it was pretty. So I think it's kind of worked, and obviously we're still doing it, and through the ups and the downs. But
I mean, it's great if you can all live in the same area and get together and talk, but sometimes it's just not possible, you know. And we don't even live that far, but it would not be possible, right? Like,
it's also about use of your time. So, like, none of us are professionals, so this isn't our job. But if you're going to come over, like, because you've said that, oh, should we record the podcast? Come over, play a game, record. But it's almost pointless. Like, you're better off coming over, playing 2 games, going home, eating dinner, taking a shower, or whatever. Putting your kid to bed, and then recording the podcast. Right? It's just kind of better for your life.
I think we've done it one time. And you had the little like recorder thing on the table, and we weren't allowed to touch the table because it would like make a huge noise. But I think we did it one time.
Yeah, and we used to do lots of cool stuff too, and I don't know why we ever stopped this. I think it's hard to remember the past, but we used to do a lot. I remember Jason and I went to a tournament in Quebec City, and we were in like this giant hotel with like a waterfall. We did like a podcast as we went through the tournament, like regularly, like the night before, and then we kind of went to the next day and in between rounds, and there's a couple little interviews here and there, and that stuff was kind of super fun. And it turns out it worked really well, and you could hear like background noise, so you could kind of feel like you were where we were, which was really cool. But
I don't know. I think I did that one time at one of the CanHammer teams, and then I used to obviously film when I went to tournaments and stuff, but. It's just hard to do that kind of thing, you know. It's way harder than people think to.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's harder to remember, and like it depends. In the last not couple years, like I've always been tryharding, but with the WTC team, I've always kind of my niche is kind of that of a horde player, a blocker player. And I'm a strong believer of when you play on a team, like even though I bring my list and maybe I underperform, is if like when I was chasing the meta and winning tournaments, I was literally playing the best army at all times. And I was going army to army every 6 months or 4 months, whatever was the best or what I thought I could win with. But then like that all shifted when I took a serious look at the WTC or ETC at the time. And I started playing like my orcs when they maybe weren't the best, but they were like pretty good. And so I'd be running them. And so I found that as I was running these more serious high model count armies, I just didn't have the time because I'd finish the next round and then you'd be exhausted. And
and I would walk over and you'd have like your 200 models just sprawled across the table. I'm like, oh, you only got 10 minutes to get to the next round.
It never bothered me. It just kind of like, it kind of monopolized my time. The other thing with those things is they're a lot of effort to edit. And so I kind of like if you ever wonder, hey, why do you do the show the way that you do it in this way? It's because it's like a lot easier to edit. And I know it drives me nuts actually when I go to edit the shows that I'm not on because Darren's start isn't like I don't know if you guys noticed that, but I would always like pause for an awkward amount of time before I would start the intro. And if you guys talked, I would then just pause again. And like I do that for a reason. It's so that there's like a clear gap when I'm editing of where the show starts. And so I don't know if you've noticed the last 4 shows, you look at it and like it'll be like you'll be having a different conversation and then you'll move into the show. And if I edit it, there's actually like sound artifacts from switching because it sounds differently when you start from good evening or when you're like and the show is and like you're kind of running on as a sentence. So right. I don't know.
We'll have to Francois, you'll have to remind me. Yeah, you got to remind me, Francois. We got to do a dramatic pause before we start in the future to make it easier for Chris.
Yeah. Because editing is a lot of work. There's a reason that when I do my lectures for my classes, I don't edit. I do one take, and if the phone rings or a plane flies by, I don't care. Just leave it in.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason I don't do the edited bat reps anymore. It's just way too much work, way too much time. And so, you know, if you want to watch it in 30 minutes, then just put it at 4 times speed and watch it in 30 minutes. So, yeah.
And like a lot, if you're doing this as a business, and we'll get back to the history of CanHammer in a second, but if you're doing podcasting as a business, yeah, you should record a 2-hour podcast and edit it down to 45 minutes of the best stuff. And that's fine. And they have editors for that do that, but then they also make an income off of it. But for us, you're right. Like if you make something too unwieldy, and I think a lot of podcasts, because I've been like super into Warhammer podcasts until about the last 2 years is when I really stopped listening. But I used to listen to everything all the time. And it was more just because my lifestyle at the time was a lot of walking to work. Like I walked an hour both ways, like one way and then an hour back every day to work. And so I'd get like 2 hours a day, and then I'd be, running cables or building something, like because I was a lower position then, so I could like listen to podcasts. Whereas now I'm like running meetings, I can't really listen during the day. And so I was listening to them all, and you would kind of notice a trend. Whenever like a really, really awesome podcast came out, and you could tell it was super high production and super well edited, they'd get to like the 5 or 6, maybe 10 episodes, and then they would just disappear.
Yeah.
And like that's not a bad thing or a good thing, but I found that like my philosophy was always, or it kind of developed through time, was do a little bit of that, but you have to also make it to the point where you can actually pump these shows out and it doesn't like kill you, right? Because if it turns into a job, you're not going to do it, and then it's not going to be fun anymore.
I mean, the main reason we do this is we like to chat about Warhammer every week. So
yeah, like you see that on the YouTube channels too, right? Like some of the channels are really high production quality and stuff, but if they don't end up going like pro with it, it just becomes too much to maintain, right? And they probably invested a lot into making it like that. So it's just it takes so much time and effort, expense, and so it's hard to just on top of the expense of playing 40K and the time it takes to play a game, it becomes really prohibitive. So I want to take you back to the beginning, 2010. So at that time, which, that was 11 years ago, and I don't think many people realize how long that you've been doing this, Chris. What else was around at that time, like podcast-wise?
It's like my favorites.
We've seen a huge explosion in the number of podcasts in the last like 2 or 3 years, right?
So there's been a ridiculous explosion this year, and I think a lot of that's to do with COVID. But yeah, so at the time, like there was quite a few, but there was not that many. One of the biggest ones at that time for fantasy was like CanHammer, which was out of Wisconsin. I actually went to their tournament. The other one was a fantasy one, was the Black Sun, which was not safe for anyone actually, at that point in time.
Were there any around then that are still around now that you know of?
Like to a certain extent, I think like that are really big. Not really. Like 40K Radio switched ownership, and then it went to like Battle Foam, and then they switched somewhere else, and I kind of lost my interest when Romeo left that podcast, because I guess I was in the minority when 40K Radio went from, they originally out of Pennsylvania. I can't even remember the guys' names. It was that long ago. And then they switched to like Battle Foam, and I thought that was the best of their shows. And then Romeo kind of quit, who's the owner of Battle Foam, because I guess people hated him or something. And then I kind of stopped listening. But as far as like big ones, I'm sure there's people out there that are like, oh, we were around, but that are really still going. There's not many that I can think of. But then again, like I don't want to be arrogant enough to say like, oh, we've been running longer. Like there probably are ones that have been running just as long. I just don't know about them, or I can't remember them.
That just makes you unreasonably persistent. Nothing else.
Well, that's part of it too. And there's been times when they all disappeared, right? So I was more of a fantasy player before 8th edition, before AOS came out. That was my primary game. So right now you'll see like 40K. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up is a lot of people ask, actually people that are not in the hobby, what's that little tag 40K AOS? But I've always tagged the show on the topic of the show, because I was always like, well, if you don't want to listen to a 40K show, just skip it, right? I'll put the tag in the name, and then you don't have to listen to that show if you don't want to, right? I never really felt the need to, like, I don't really care if you want to listen to it or not. I want to tell you up front, 40K show, you're not interested, get lost. So we always kind of tagged them. And back in the olden days, it used to be WFB was the tag on like 90% of the shows, and 40K was like 2 or 3 a year. Like we'd do the War Masters Challenge, which was ran by Nate Stevens. We used to go to all of those, and it was basically a doubles one day and a singles the next day, and they did 40K and fantasy, different tournaments. So we'd always do a 40K show for that, and I've been doing the Adeptcon team since 2011. The 4-man Adeptcon team, or 20. And so we always did a 40K team, even though I primarily played fantasy for that. And so we do shows that covered that. And we just kind of moved through the years for 12 years. Now, it did take a long time to hit 200 episodes. Like 12 years, not 12 years, sorry, 11 years to hit 200 episodes. That's like 10 episodes a year, which makes sense because we used to be monthly for most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, because when I looked that up, episode 38 was 2014, so that's about right. Sort of going back to
yeah, and I think like to my point earlier, like it's not that I minded the weekly show. I find the weekly show maybe a bit much for me personally, and I don't know if that's because I actually start forgetting what we're doing. When we did the monthly shows, we had like detailed show notes and topics, and then you would edit it a lot more because you only had to do it once per month. So you were able to like actually edit it down. And so that was kind of the root of it was that. Like I used to go through at one point in time and remove all like as many ums and ahs as I could. Like I would recognize the wave pattern of it, and then I would try and get rid of them all.
That's hardcore.
But then you learn, right? That doesn't do anything to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Like you might lose some people, but is that worth it or not?
Well, in fact, sometimes it can add to the genuine feeling of things if it's just a conversation. Weird pauses included.
Yeah. One thing that I always believed in when I first started it, and it kind of hurts me a little bit with the last 4 shows that you guys did, is I always liked. I don't know if you guys know this. I like really structured segments. And we haven't done structured segments for a long time, but back before we used to live stream, we used to record segments. So we would be like on the air like this. And so the original one was, okay, we're going to do the HQs of the lords of the, Warriors of Chaos book. And we would sit here and we would just record the lords, and then we would stop the recording, save it. And then we would like take like a 5-minute break, and then we would get into the heroes. And so I found that actually allowed us to flow a little bit better and do things like that, but it's a ton of work, right?
So when did we go to live podcasting? That was a recent thing.
That was Logan. Yeah. When Logan started, he wanted to get into Twitch and live streaming because I believe it's because Frontline Gaming did that. He might say it was something else. Maybe it was like because he's a hardcore video gamer or whatnot. But yeah, it was basically because of Logan. He always hosted the streams, and actually for a while you hosted the streams. I never had I quit video games back in like 2012. I quit video games like 100%, and I started playing video games again 3 years ago. So I went something like 5 years with no video games. So I never had like a gaming computer that could stream. I always just had like I used to record this on like a really old laptop.
So there was a time we were live streaming, and then we stopped doing that for a while, and then we started live streaming the podcast again, maybe like a year ago or a year and a half.
It was more than a year ago.
Time
it
flies.
was like 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, I don't have the exact dates. I'm never really I'm not a sentimental person for the most part. I don't track milestones like that. So
yeah, and then because for sure for the YouTube live streams, not many people would watch in the old days. Our viewership really exploded after we got to Spoil 8th. That's when the YouTube channel really took off and live streams and stuff like that. But before that, there wasn't much audience. 3 or 4 people watching on those Twitch streams. I seem to recall.
Yeah, there was times we got a little bit higher. I didn't worry about it because we always had the strong. Let's be honest. Even at the heyday on the YouTube, our largest base was always iTunes.
Yeah.
The podcast throughout the years, even to this day, I want to say for most things, maybe not everything, has always been the most downloads, the most listens, the most kind of way that we're recognized as well. So I got recognized the other day on who was streaming somebody was streaming my game against Innis. Was it Scary? I don't know if you guys saw that.
I think it was Scary. I think I watched
Scary
it.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
It was Scary.
So Scary was streaming that game, and there was somebody basically was like, "I recognize your voice from CanHammer." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." But I get that a lot. not a lot anymore, obviously, because I haven't been in a tournament in like a year. But yeah, where you'd be like, nobody knows what I look like because as I told you, I'm pretty camera shy for the most part. But when I would be in person, they'd hear me talk, and so be like, I know your voice. I got that the most.
Well, you got a real kind of radio voice too.
I don't know, man. I hate hearing my own voice.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody hates their own voice unless you're using your voice professionally.
Even they probably do as well. But
yeah.
But no, it's kind of interesting that you guys got me back on to talk about the 12-year. And like, I do want to address, like, just quite brief, like, I didn't leave because I'm angry. I don't want to do it anymore. I kind of want to do it again. I'm just, the pandemic wears people out.
Yeah, it's been a very weird year, and the year continues of playing, not playing, casting, not casting. Sometimes too much to talk about, sometimes nothing to talk about. Like, it's interesting that like monthly and then like weekly, just to like catch up and like with all the books and stuff coming out. Somebody tried doing a daily podcast that didn't last very long, but and then now it's like, maybe bi-weekly is maybe the balance with how often they're releasing stuff these days. Like, yeah. And
so I always kind of followed the motto of like, I want to do what I want to watch. And so I don't know if there's sometimes, I think you guys have probably experienced this where people want to talk about a certain segment, or you guys want to do something I'm like, I don't actually care about that. So I don't want to do it. And I know that sounds kind of stupid, but I always kind of thought that way. So like, if I don't mind, like I listen to Joe Rogan a lot, or I used to, and like, I don't mind it when they take a break and like, cheers and mixed drinks and stuff. Like, that doesn't bother me as a listener, but I know it bothers other people. So I always kind of was like, well, we could leave some more of the raw stuff in. As far as like the time period, I think like if you release a weekly podcast, me as an adult who consumes a fair amount of content, I can't keep up with a weekly podcast. So that's kind of my, where I'm kind of, that's why I think like, every 2 weeks or every month is really, really good as well, because then you kind of want people to wait for your next show. You don't want people to always have your next show. And even though I love doing it weekly and it's been really fun, that's always in the back of my mind.
Yeah, it's it's certainly getting harder schedule wise, and I certainly can't consume that much anymore now that I don't commute more than 5 minutes. So it's like, I haven't listened to a podcast in a long time because I just don't have the time to do that anymore.
I think that's the misconception about the pandemic as well, is like, our numbers are fine, but they're not. There's just so much content out there, and people aren't people are consuming stuff, but it's like, I don't need to consume a podcast because I'm at home with a Wi-Fi connection. You know what I mean? So I can put on I was actually talking to just Derek about like you can put on a Premier League game and just like have it run in the background, right? Like, you don't need to be, because you're at home all the time, you don't need to have like audio files, save the data, like do that stuff. So I'm wondering if that's kind of, and then people are maybe burning out, because I think the market is super saturated on podcasts right now. But I think like our demographic has always been fairly stable in the fact that there still to this day isn't a lot of good Canadian or consistent Canadian shows. They kind of pop up and then disappear. Like, I can't even really think of one. Like there's Val and the Falcon, and they're probably the most famous Canadian show right now. But how consistent they are, I'm not 100% sure, because I can't keep up, obviously, because I don't have enough time to listen to as many as I want. And they talk about mostly American things. So
yeah.
Whereas like, I thought it was cool. Like, one of the reasons I really started the podcast, and back in the day, used to get a lot of comments about this, is people used to be excited to hear their name. And so like, we'd be listening to a tournament in Texas or something, or a report, and they talk about people, but we don't really know any of these people. These people through podcasts, you don't really know them. But when you're talking about like a War Masters Challenge or a Capital City, like, you're naming the guys, and you're like, oh, I played him at this tournament, and I know that guy from this tournament, and oh, that's the guy that runs the Quebec tournament, right? And just kind of an interesting thing. So I always thought that was important, and I always wanted to focus our content more on the Canadian side, which, some people could call that, what is that, the Canadian insecurity, where everything has to be Canadian. But I was like, well, that's kind of our niche, right? Like, I'm sure the German podcasts talk about the German tournaments. I'm sure they don't talk about American tournaments. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's kind of where I focused. But then sadly, like most of the big tournaments we play in are in the States. So
Yeah. Although we do have two of the biggest tournaments in Canada too, which is that's more recent development though, obviously.
well, like John Green, so CanHammer Team Tournament was actually like John Green's brainchild.
That's right.
He's the original founder of that. Like I helped him with it. I brought the tables and I helped him run it and did a lot of legwork, but ultimately it was always his show initially. And like that was the first ETC back then style tournament, I think, in the country.
Yeah.
At that time. It was the only one. And then even when we started getting bigger and bigger, like people tried to do it, but they just never, it was like the only one, right? So
I don't think there were many in the States either. If I'd never heard of it.
yeah, they had the one down in Tennessee that got huge.
Yeah, but that wasn't ETC. That was like ITC in a team format.
But I think it started out as ETC.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, that was the ATC. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think it was more. I think it evolved over time. I've never been, obviously, but yeah, that's kind of their style to it, which is totally fine. But yeah, we never really had that here, and same with GTS. Like what we did with Capital City, it always felt like when we started Capital City, it was in my mind supposed to be the next Adeptcon. So anybody that's ever gone, like, because as I said, like, why do I do things? We do things because that's what we want. And so I wanted an Adeptcon style kind of tournament here in the regard of like Adeptcon's always in a nice venue. It's a focus on tournaments, even though it's a convention, the focus is on tournaments. It's not we had a lot of Canadian conventions, but they were conventions first. Like when you go to Gen Con, it's a convention first and there's a tournament at Gen Con. Whereas Capital City was always, this is like a tournament that's also kind of a convention.
Yeah.
When was the first Capital City Bloodbath?
Whew, that's a good question. It was the year before AOS came out. So when's that?
2014? 13? 14?
I'll do a quick
Google. No. That was later than that. Yeah, let's do a quick Google because I started playing again back when
2015
AOS came out. So yeah, there we go.
2015. So it was 2014 was the first Capital City.
Okay.
And it was run in the hotel across the street from the current venue.
The Hilton, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And so and that was the first time we ever did that, and it was a fantasy only GT.
Yeah.
And then when AOS dropped, we tried our darndest. Logan and I wrote a comp pack. We tried to balance based on wounds, and we tried a whole bunch of other things. And that was, and then it just kind of failed.
This was AOS before the General's Handbook.
Correct, which was a couple years before the General's Handbook, actually.
The first couple of years of AOS were terrible.
Yeah, it was so bad.
It was depressing because, like, that's why Andrew and I started, and Jason, we started it because we were all fantasy players. And then we made the decision to pivot to 40K, and that's how Logan actually, because he ran the first 40K one, because that was his style, because we did both, right? And I always ran the AOS, because that was kind of more my niche, and he was more in the 40K. So he started that, and then the 40K just overtook, like in 1 year, like tripled even our original fantasy numbers, and kept growing and growing and growing. And, we've had some growing pains with that event as well over time. Like we tried adding in lots of smaller events, and it didn't really seem to go well because they actually went great, but there's a lot of time where when you run a convention in a place like Ottawa, there's only a certain size of pool, and the X-Wing players are the same guys playing 40K or the same guys playing fantasy, right? So when you run them all together, you're actually just getting people kind of picking the one that they want, and it doesn't necessarily increase the numbers or help your event that much, right? Like
cannibalizing your own event.
A little bit, which isn't a bad thing, right? You still have the same amount of players, you have more variety of games, but yeah, it kind of ran us into a thing. Now, there was a turning point when the whole podcast almost ended.
Oh yeah?
It was right when AOS dropped, it's not because of AOS. So there was a time when GW did their first ever, and I remember we were one of the bigger we were the bigger Canadian podcast by a long shot at that time that I knew of. Obviously, I don't know everything for Warhammer Fantasy anyway, and this always bugged me, and this is kind of why I always resent the tournament support from GW a little bit. They were giving out free Age of Sigmar boxes early to a lot of media outlets, and there was this podcast out in British Columbia called CanHammer.
CanHammer.
And they got a box and they leaked it early. And to this day, I think that they're the ones that got us screwed out of any GW support for any of our events.
Yeah, we never get even like an email back from GW about anything.
Correct. And we run the 2 largest tournaments in the country.
Yeah.
We also have had a 11-year podcast, a YouTube channel that, like, let's face it, the YouTube channel is not huge and the podcast isn't huge, but it's not nothing. But yeah, we don't even get an answer back. And that was like kind of the first time when that happened. And I was like, well, I didn't really email them. And then when those guys CanHammer like leaked that stuff, and then like I heard a rumor that it was like somebody thought we were the ones that leaked it. And I was like, no, we have nothing to do with them. They're in British Columbia. Like, I don't even know these people. Like, I think I met them once at like a tournament. But so that always that was the one day that I think I was really serious about calling her quits. When I was like, well, they're smaller than us. They got it. And then they leaked it and they kind of ruined it for the rest of us. So I don't know if that's like interesting to put out there, but that's always been in the back of my mind.
Calling out these CanHammer bros.
Yeah, well, they probably don't even play anymore, or they probably don't even listen. I don't even know I can't even remember what their names are in real life. Like I used to know, like kind of know, like, oh, that's this guy, and I like, but it's been so long, right? That but that was always irritating. And actually recently, I think there's been a few smaller media outlets that kind of got sponsorship and early releases. And so, as you said, Darren, we did get to spoil. Actually, there's been quite a few times we got to spoil. And so I was way back when they first started putting Games Workshop books on iPads, like the digital versions. I don't think they were selling that many. And they were releasing them UK time. So we were able to get them 6 hours early, like before midnight, and release a video that day reviewing like the new books. And our viewership and listenership went through the roof when you get a book out early.
Yeah.
Like when you're the podcast out a week before the release of Dark Angels, you do a Dark Angel book review, your views are like 100 times the podcast the same day as the book comes out, right? And so in the back of my mind throughout these years, there's always been kind of that little salt regarding, we don't get the books early and it's hurting our viewership and our kind of future. And then the odd time we get to leak something and it explodes, right? And you're like, oh my God. Yeah. But we can't release it because we don't have non-disclosures. But yeah, that always bothered me.
Yeah, I used to look more at my viewers and subs, and and we had started the Patreon and all that sort of stuff. But now I'm just like, I'm doing this for fun, and if two people watch me. Yeah, if 2 people watch me and they want to watch the whole thing, then that's better than 2,000 people and only, 10% of people care. So that's kind of my approach.
The first couple bat raps that you had me on, Darren, I made the mistake of reading the YouTube comments, and I have not done that since. It's been years since I've looked at YouTube comments.
We used to do a lot more too with like listener mail and stuff like that, and then it got kind of out of control. And now I don't really get emails or ask for them anymore because it's like it's not that I don't care, but it's like that's one of the things, as you said, with comments. One bad email or one bad comment offsets like 100 or 1,000 good ones. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I remember.
It's weird how we work that way. Even if you're like, I don't care, that's one person. I know 100 people that like that segment. The one bad sticks with you, which is crazy that's how that we work as human beings. And maybe some people are better than others. But when you hear guys like Joe Rogan being like, don't read the comments, you're like, well, this guy's like a multimillionaire and he doesn't read his comments. Like that there's that he probably still feels bad for that, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us again, Chris, for taking us down that memory lane. And it's actually like 11 years is actually a long time to have a podcast. actually.
A for free podcast with no
that
money.
doesn't make you any money. That is like a labor of love that's a long time in gaming, 11 years. Like, not many things last that long.
Well, yeah, it's I don't think it's over. It's just that,
Yeah,
like,
this is the last show, by the way. No.
we could end her. It's good. We could end her tonight, man. Cancel the hosting service and
Been a good run.
So someone asked actually what was like what's in our future, and maybe we'll finish our show tonight with thoughts from everybody, what they feel like we should do or do more of or do less of or change or
like in the podcast or in general, like the organization that we're in.
The podcast.
Yeah, for the specific podcast, I think like the future, I don't know. We just got to kind of keep doing what we want to do, and there's no point. If you were to turn this into a business, let's say, and go full time, I could see I would make some major changes. Like if I was like, oh, this is gonna be my job from now on, I would make pretty major changes to the content, the preparation, the quality, and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think I could definitely see coming back again. Like I can't believe we talked for an hour. It went by pretty quick. Had a great time, and we could definitely do it more in the future. But I think as far as an organization goes, we just got to kind of figure out what we want to do, and move that direction. Do we want to run competitive events? Do we want to run softer events? Like I have my personal, like, do you guys have a Warhammer like to-do list?
Yeah, I do.
Like not to do. That's not the right.
Like paint this model right here.
No. Like, do you have like an accomplishment list?
Yeah.
What's on your list, Francois?
So for me, because I'm kind of I guess the new kid, even though I started playing in the early '90s, but I took a very long break. I only started playing again beginning of 8th, really seriously. And now that my kids are a little bit older, I want to travel to events and I want to actually do well. Like I know it's silly, but I want to look at my name in the ITC rankings and be not at the top, obviously, but
be
up
the
there
only
somewhere.
French person.
I want to be the only French sounding name in the top 100.
Who's this Francis? Who's this Francis?
This 2020 was going to be the year that I was going to do that. Travel to events, go to LVO, go to tournaments out of town, and then of course the whole pandemic happened. But that's my goal for 2021 and 2022 and onwards.
So my list is being very long and ongoing, and it's kind of interesting because you guys were making fun of me on the last podcast, but like having a painted epic army was on my Warhammer achievement list from like when I like 20 years or 15 years, and this pandemic allowed me to achieve that. Right, I don't have to go to tournaments. I painted epic army, so I wanted the trifecta: Battlefleet, Gothic, Dark Angel fleet, a 40k Dark Angel army, and an epic Dark Angel army. Because I've always had it in my mind, and I'm never going to do it, but I've always had it in my mind that I wanted to kind of play an epic game that was like started with a Gothic game and then went to a 40k game. And so that was one of them. So that was like off my list now. And then you guys are making fun of it, the Flames of War. I always had a Flames of War British army in a box, and I had it in piece. I always wanted a fully painted Flames of War army. I don't know why. It's just like I always wanted that. So I did that. And then there's the other like kind of 40k achievements. Like I always wanted to win the Adeptcon team tournament, and I did that. I won the general twice and the overall once, or maybe overall twice, general once. So that's like done, right? So now I go to Adeptcon, it's more for fun, or because I've already kind of achieved that. And then for me, I really want to win at WTC. That's kind of on my, like if we were to go this year and win it.
That's it. You're retired.
I don't know. I could almost. I've actually thought about that. Like, do I retire? But my problem is I always chase the next one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting that's the way. But I would like to do more streaming games. The pandemic screwed me. I got a really nice streaming setup, and I was streaming a lot of games early on in the station. But the pandemic just kind of ruined everything for me. Kind of got me out of that routine. Made it illegal for me to have somebody over. Like it's been illegal for. Yeah. Like now it's not, but that's as of Monday this week, right? Yeah. So that really hurt me. So yeah, I would love to stream more games. I would like to do more like competitive stuff. I don't have my mojo right now as much as I would like to, but there was a time when we could review a book and we could really give a lot of good tips and how to use it and how to play it. And I would like to move in that direction more. It's just that with the pandemic, it's a lot harder, right? It's a lot harder.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think the podcast, as we've been steering it more recently, has been just that. It's been focused on, well, what do you guys want to talk about tonight, right? Like, despite all these books popping out, we've tried to stay away from the book reviews because I got to tell you, there's so many avenues to get that information these days, and we just don't feel like we need to do that, you know. And
well, I can tell you my favorite time. I know that I'm kind of dragging the show on, but whatever. Fuck it. This is about the history.
The first time I was on was your favorite time, right?
Yes, exactly. Every time. My favorite kind of show format was one of like piecemeal, a piecemeal approach where, and this was back in fantasy, it was a lot easier to do. So we would do a show and we start off with like, this is what we've been doing and hobby wise. And I think like that can almost go away because people don't really care anymore. Like if you want to see our hobby, you go to Twitter or Instagram. It's a different medium. We don't really want to talk about it. But we would do that, and then we would get into like the news and our take, which of course nobody does anymore because the times have changed. But back then, people would listen. I would get people being like, "We listen to your show to know what's going on in 40K world because we don't get White Dwarf or we don't go on the internet as much because it wasn't as like 10 years ago. It was different, right?
yeah,
The smartphones and stuff." And then we would do like a lore review. So in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, there would be like lores of magic, and we would just do a review every show. We'd go through the spells, what wizards could take them, and how they worked, and it was more of a, this is to refresh you and get you ready for what somebody can do to you, right? And so we had like all these little segments, so a show was really planned out and kind of cut up in that way so that we could definitely kind of add that to it. So instead of doing like a book review, which we used to do in entirety, but you could do like, we're going to talk about this character this show, or we're going to talk about this, or, you know, this list one with 3 Catan. Let's talk about 3 Transcendent Catan and just spend like 20 minutes really having a thought out conversation on them instead of kind of covering the whole book, which is kind of irrelevant, right?
yeah.
So I definitely like stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to try and bring back, some, you know, hobby segments. And you're right, like you don't have to see what I'm working on, but you can talk about things. And I asked like Francois and Nick all the time about hobby things that I don't know about, or tips, or what paint should I use for this, or, you know, that kind of stuff people do appreciate. And then
that stuff, yeah. I'm just saying like back in the olden days, there was like almost like a script to podcasts, and a lot of them were very samey. And you would listen to like a music podcast, and it would be like, oh, this is the song that I learned this week. Like they were all very, like there was almost a way to do them, and that's kind of evolved over time.
yeah.
And nowadays, yeah, people want like more concise, very specific topics because let's face it, human beings are losing our we're not all kind of ADHD, but we're losing our retention kind of span, like attention span. Sorry, not retention span.
Yeah.
But we're all kind of losing it.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Chris, for joining us again tonight. Francois, as usual, thanks everybody for watching, for subscribing, for listening on iTunes. And we will be back maybe next week. The schedule will go up as usual on the weekend. So thanks very much for supporting, guys, and have a good evening.
Cheers.